A stranger drove my family home.
Sometime between 1990 and 1994, my parents and my brother were driving home from Toronto back to London, not the cool one. My mom, clearly the more observant one, would always ask my dad in Mandarin why some people would say change oil in English. My dad confidently told her that meant the same thing as getting gas, because when directly translated to Mandarin, there wasn't much distinction between changing engine oil and refilling your gas tank.
You can probably see where this is going.
About 20 minutes outside of Toronto, the second-hand 1980s Ford my dad bought for probably a few $100s started spewing black smoke from the hood. My dad pulled over and waited for police and a tow while my mom cradled my infant brother by the freeway barriers.
They stood there in the rain wondering what to do.
Both barely spoke the local language. They couldn't afford a Happy Meal for my brother on his birthday. They'd have to secretly save for months in advance for that treat, and they'd watch him eat it alone as they went hungry. Now they were stuck on the side of the freeway with nothing but the clothes they brought from a continent over and a toddler over an hour from home.
An elderly Caucasian gentleman pulled over and asked my parents if they were okay.
He got my mom and brother in the car while he figured out how to get a tow with my dad and the highway patrol. My mom always points out how his car was pristine leather inside and they were wet and smelly from the smoke and rain.
Didn't seem to bother the stranger though.
The tow guy informed my dad that changing engine oil is not the same as refilling your tank, something that my mom will never let him forget.
After the tow was figured out, the stranger offered to drive my parents home. Still about 1.5 hours away in the rain.
At some point he mentioned he lived in or around Toronto, so this was out of his way for him. No GPS, no smartphone, no request for gas money, and barely able to communicate due to the language barrier, this man drove my parents home and dropped them off.
Presumably to continue with his day back to Toronto.
My parents never got his name nor his number, and they didn't know enough about cars to remember what brand his car was. I like it when my mom tells me this story every few years or so, thinking it's the first time she's told me.
It's one of the few that isn't an immigrant story tainted with racism.
And it bothers me that the stranger may not know how much it meant, how much it means to this day. Anyways, if any of y'all got a dad or granddad out there driving families left out on the side of freeways outside of Toronto sometime between 1990 to 1994, tell him thanks. And I probably owe him some gas money, adjusted for inflation of course. Edit, no idea I was born after 1994 and times got better. But my dad was paid essentially minimum wage as a researcher in the process of obtaining his PhD.
Not sure if they had to pay tuition?
I think his hours were technically limited to on paper, so even if he worked X amount of hours, he only earned Y amount. They lived in a shared basement somewhere in Toronto.
2 families in 2 separate rooms in a basement. I think rent was a few hundred.
Then the rest went towards groceries and taking care of my brother probably. Food, clothes, etc. McDonald's wasn't expensive, but my brother distinctly remembers begging for Happy Meals for the first few years in Canada because he only got it on his birthday.